What's going on, everybody? It's me, Asad Hashim Ali, back again with another episode of Behind the Grind. It's episode number 10, everybody. Episode number 10, the 10th guest. Not really the 10th guest because episode 9 was with an old guest. And this time we've got with me, Shazminay Durrani. Shazminay, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Shazminay is an old friend of mine. You could say that we practically grew up together because we've seen each other in our good and our bad forms, physically and mentally as well. We were in school together at Lyceum, and since then we've always been in touch. She's one of my closest friends. And why is a very old friend of mine on the show is because, as always, Behind the Grind is that podcast where we sit with people who are doing cool shit on a regular basis, people whose stories I like to hear, people whose grind I admire. And Shazminay definitely has a solid work ethic, and she's just been super focused since the day I've known her. So Shazminay, how about you actually share to everyone, what are you really up to? What are you doing these days?
Thank you for saying all of that.
My pleasure. I try, I really try. I try to make sure that the first 30 seconds are like the most comforting and the most soothing, and all the compliments go out there. Then they stop. That's what you're getting.
But it's like that dhakka start, right?
That dhakka start, exactly.
But no, I'm so happy to be here. I know we've been talking about it for so long. I think we were talking about it since even before you started it. And I'm glad you're doing it.
That is right. That is right. You were supposed to be on the first 5, actually. I had this list made up, and I spoke to Shazminay well before I even started off with the podcast. I had made a few videos on YouTube, but then I thought that, let her know in advance. And a year later, it's happened.
Well, it happened, right? Better late than never.
No.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool thing that you're up to, and it's inspiring me. But what I'm doing is basically what almost everyone's up to these days, which is figuring it out. Putting your hands everywhere and then figuring it out, what works, what doesn't work. Doing a lot of work from home, which seems to be default mode right now. Working in the education space. And yeah, just the usual grind.
Don't be so humble about it. Don't be modest. Tell people, what are you really doing? Like in education, you're working with this organization called RISE. Am I correct?
Yeah,
RISE is the acronym.
I didn't tell you that.
I did some research. I'm not that bad of a host.
That's interesting. Yeah, no. So RISE is basically this project that DFID, which is the Department for International Development, they run this program, and it's a research-oriented program that basically just thinks about kind of like what are the innovative ways in which we can, break away from the ways of which we've known education and kind of innovate a little more. So it's basically research oriented, but what I'm more into these days is looking at the kind of implementation space in Sindh, mostly to the public sector of education, but also towards like child protection and child well-being. And these are things that I've worked with in kind of at a distance, but never up close. So that's happening right now. What makes it difficult though is because we're stuck at home. These are the things in Karachi and in Pakistan, especially, you need to be on the ground all the time. You need to be physically chasing things. So that becomes very difficult. We're not structurally amenable to distant work in this country. So yeah, I mean, new stuff, exciting stuff. Was that humble? Was that not humble? Does that work?
Getting there. No, but can you elaborate a little bit on the implementation side in Sindh? Like, what exactly are you working on? Because I remember briefly we spoke about social emotional learning and emotional well-being of children. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what are you doing to work towards solving this problem?
It's not solving problem, big word. No, but it's more towards like kind of bringing it into the narrative, right? So this also kind of includes the education narrative that you and I grew up with, which was very focused on kind of like the transcript, right? Focused very, very grade centric. And that still is the reality for most children. And I get why, I get how important a transcript is, but like Social emotional learning does not mean that you forget about the grade, but more that you include it, or you kind of enhance it with some more substance that is more kind of fruitful towards a person's character and growth. And these are things that people are doing in isolation, right? So it's happening in some private schools, it's perhaps also happening in some nonprofits. But what I'm trying to work on is a curriculum, or not even a curriculum, a manual that can facilitate instruction in classrooms, instruction that is enriched by a social emotional learning mindset. So this is largely for teachers, and it's going to mostly be for government teachers. So that makes it a little kind of challenging, because this is just so unfamiliar to the grammar of teaching in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes it also harder is that it's not going to have any interaction. Like, I'm not going to ever be able to meet the people who will be using this. So it's all very like, you make it and then you just give it, and then people make sense out of it the way they do. So that's what I meant by the implementation bit. It's
Okay, so like,
distinct.
so are you using the teachers as the as a way to pass on this message and try to like make sure that the children actually see the results of your efforts, of the organization's efforts, or is it more like you're also engaging with the kids as well, side by side?
Yeah. So, I mean, what would normally happen in normal circumstances, which is sans pandemic, is that you would do a lot of like baseline stuff. So you would start at a small scale, you would pilot something like this, and then you would move from there, right? But because right now, and I think the need for this and the demand for this is even more acute right now, it's because, like, children are going to come back to school with very different needs, with being separated from their colleagues, from their friends, from their teachers for a very long amount of time, and perhaps even might have witnessed things that have been traumatic, have witnessed loss. We don't know, right? So they're going to come back with these different needs, and to equip teachers with not just like skills that can help them accelerate students' learning in terms of like their grades, but also help them understand like what do children need right now, like what are the things that we can do to put them in a place where they can then learn better or learn more effectively, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is. I'm not really sure about how we're going to evaluate this. I have no idea how we're going to follow up on this, and that is just such a typical Pakistani development thing to say, because you do all of these things and there's never any follow up. There's no concept of evaluation. And when I'm saying never, I mean in the larger public space. I think all of this does happen in the private space, where you have the comfort of doing this on a small scale. But when you work with the government, the projects are always working on a bigger scale, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to monitor, to evaluate. So, those are things that I don't know, but I would hope that it would happen.
Mm-hmm. So, Shazmir, what are some of the how is it happening right now? Like, um, what is the current scenario like in these schools, or these government-run schools, so these public schools right now? Like, are the teachers just going in and like teaching the three core fundamentals and then walking out, or is there any work that's happening before like you having entered into this, or Rise having entered into this space?
Yeah, well, this isn't a RISE. This project is not a RISE project. It's a different one. But
Mm-hmm.
even like if we were to talk about like the average government school, it's very much what you say, which is that it is a literacy focused. By literacy, I mean just literally like very literate literacy, which is just reading and writing,
Mm-hmm.
and no comprehension whatsoever for the most part, right? So that's what it's been in the cases that I have worked with. But there are these kind of like positive like deviances. You always find some people who are so motivated and who are trying their new things, but you know there's severe resource limitations, right? So for a lot of people, it's very hard to do these things without money, without funds, without stationery and all of these basic supplies. Like, you walk into a normal school, an average school, and you'll see the roof has fallen down. You'll see there's no furniture. You'll see there's a teacher teaching under a tree. And these things have become normal now, so they don't even bother us anymore. So, that's what the situation seems to be for the most part. And so we're doing things the way we've done them through the years, regardless of how much rhetoric there is of reform and change, on ground it's quite literally the same now for the most part. I think what's interesting to see is that different NGOs are now working with the government through public-private partnerships, and so, but even that is something that hasn't been evaluated. So we don't know whether this has been, on paper, it seems like this would, improve things to get the nonprofit sector involved, to get the private sector involved, to outsource management. Because what happens really with bureaucratic organizations is that it becomes very hard to manage. So when you outsource management, you imagine that it would make things better, but again, it's something that hasn't been fully evaluated yet. So I'm not really sure if that has potential to change the average situation.
Hmm. So this you since you mentioned the public-private partnerships, actually, I've been looking at this space for a while now, and I think, well, maybe this is something which just exists in Pakistan, is that no matter what space you want to get into, whether that be non-profit or for-profit, you will find these silos that are trying to solve major problems,
Yeah, yeah.
and huge problems. Like these end up becoming global solutions, but people
Mhm.
aren't like merging together or like pooling in resources together and working as one front. So what are, like, explain that a little bit to me, like why do you feel that even happens in the first place?
Yeah, I mean that's just you just hit the nail on the head, right? Because what happens is that all of this phenomenal work is happening in silos, in isolation from one another, and nobody's talking to each other about the work, right? And by talking, I don't just mean like letting them know, but by talking, I mean like how can we, to make impact, you need to consolidate effort. Like to make impact, you need to have some kind of synergy, and the reason that lacks is because the who gets the synergy is a big question mark. Like who kind of creates that consolidation, or who brings these people together, right? I would imagine that that's the task of that's largely the role of the government, right? That's just never been on the agenda. Like it's like you give a project to this organization, you give another one to that, and that's that. There's really no impetus to bring them together, or to figure out that these organizations are representing very. I mean, largely the goal is the same, but they have a different way of doing things, and we need to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how can they learn from one another to make a bigger impact. That kind of thinking isn't there. That kind of iterative mindset that we want to take one step, look here and there, make people talk to one another, then move on. That's just not there, and that's not something you can teach to people who are in power. Like, what do you do? So it's a big
Because it comes
rabbit
down to
hole.
that, right? It comes down to that, is that they want to have that control, or they want to be able to like dictate that this is my way and that's how it's going to happen. They don't want any
Yeah,
other opinions to like to somehow ruin that for them.
yeah, for sure. That's what it is.
So like and you've actually been someone who I since I think way before A levels also, you were constantly like working with different organizations around the city as well. So like what has been that one common factor between all of these like organizations which they just don't see? Because I think that the last time you were in town, you were working with Karangi Public School also, and then before that, you were with the Akuat Foundation as well. So I know you've got a pretty solid and diverse background in this space. But yeah, what is it that they all just don't see together?
I think the I mean, I would say that one thing that's common is that they all are working with the government now in some capacity, right? So is the Citizens Foundation, so is Kiran Foundation. So a lot of hands, all of them are working with the government now. And I think they're all frustrated, oops, by it. But I think what needs to kind of happen is a consolidation, a kind of rethinking of like what is it that they want to achieve through education, right? So, like, is education an end for them, or is education a means to an end? Because that is a conversation that kind of informs the way they do things. Because a lot, then what I've noticed is with a lot of these projects, these schools end up just becoming like another school, like another average government school. And I'm not saying that the average government school is particularly bad, but what I'm saying is that, you know, if your mindset is to innovate, if your mindset is to do something different, then you need to be kind of like reflecting on your work and evaluating your work. That's just, again, that's not part of our DNA to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes very hard also because a lot of them have small teams and a lot of them have limited resources,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them have to work with government staff. So I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily a point of dissonance that is creating issues. Really, I think it's more of like a lack of coordination. So more than the things they would be at odds about, it's the lack of being able to converse with one another and have these, create these spaces where they can share their findings or practices, best practices, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something that uh, I would rather point to that. Yeah.
All right, interesting. So I'm going to segue a little bit actually um, into our experiences from middle school, from high school, then from university as well. Is that how do you feel that those experiences have actually um, helped you to make a bigger impact in what you're doing or and work towards that impact? And please don't say that you're not making any impact because you're clearly doing lots of great work. So and for a while I think you're one of the few people who've actually sustained that effort for quite a while and has been in it passionately since, again, like since before I've even known you. So, what do you feel like are some key instances from your own education journey that are coming into play now?
Oh God, I don't even know. I mean, I actually wonder sometimes if there are key instances in my education journey that, and I don't mean to sound like a cynic, I really don't, but I wonder, I mean, there's always the basic, right? Like the ability to speak in English,
Mm-hmm.
that's power. Getting the grades, that's power. That takes you to another step that then takes you. So, if you trace back the journey, then of course, there's so much to say. But if I was to speak in terms of like principle, substantive stuff, then I actually can't trace back um, anything that I would say contributed to a sense of civic consciousness or a sense of like, what am I interested about? Or what am I interested in, right? Because it just so happens that I'm interested in these things. This isn't social work. It's my profession. So this is about what I'm interested in, right? And I mean, I don't think I ever grew up or I was ever told that this could be a potential career option or that this is actually even in my mind, it was very clear that it was A, B, C, or D. There was no other alphabet. There was no other language. There was no Alif, Be, Pe. There was nothing, right? So, in terms of options, I don't know if there was something in the schooling experience that kind of indicated what I wanted to do. I think it definitely does show you what you don't want to do. And you realize that with time. I think more than more than subjects and more than the system, I think it was people. So there were some teachers, there were some individuals at Lyceum, there were some colleagues and friends like you guys, um, who kind of led to this. But I don't know if there was anything beyond that. It's a pretty bad answer, I think. Oops.
It's true though, like that's what you see. But like,
Yeah.
what about in terms of sharing some of those experiences, sharing some of those memories, and allowing these kids to recreate those same memories as you. Anything like
You know,
that?
it's just that we come from such a huge point of privilege, right? So, like, I'll give you an example. So, when I started doing all of this, everyone just wanted me to focus on teaching English. And there's this thing called ESL, English as a secondary
Mm-hmm.
language, and I had no expertise in that. But though my only expertise really was speaking English, so for a government school, my fluency in English was an asset. And then so what you do is you create this curriculum in English and you teach teachers how to speak in English and children how to speak in English, and you force them that you can only speak in English, for reasons that you yourself don't know. And you realize that, for what? And not once do you pause and question, like, why are we so kind of, why are we chasing this so much? Why is it so important for them to know how to speak in English, or just only know how to speak in English, right? So I can't possibly compare my experiences with theirs, because where I was growing up, or the kind of life that our schools were pushing us to aspire to, learning English was very important because English is a class. But for these children, I don't know if the medium of instruction needs to be that. I don't know if English needs to be the main focus of their education, right? So I just don't think that the experiences are comparable, although they should be. Like ideally, I should have gone to a public school where I was able to meet people who didn't come from my background, where I was able to meet people who spoke a different language, who came from a different kind of social space. But I didn't. Right? It was very exclusive. All of our experiences were. So it's very hard to compare. Actually, that's what makes it very hard is when you go into that space to erase those memories sometimes and be like, look, no, I cannot get them each a tablet. I cannot possibly get each of them a textbook. The textbooks will not always have color because it's just not gonna. You need to be practical about it. So you kind of have to do the opposite, which is erase some of your memories and forget that everyone needs to have your education experience. I think that is a constant kind of negotiation.
I'm so glad you said that, because what I've been thinking about, and recently I was working with a friend of mine on just helping her come across some mental health awareness amongst the youth in Pakistan, but like in the context of Pakistan with the native
Mm.
language, right? And I think that what we also tend, and that just working on that a little bit and doing some research in that project got me to think about that we tend to tackle these problems without knowing the context of the problems. We tend to forget about that. It's a very it's not, you can't say situational, but
Mm-hmm.
the situation is just different. We grew up
Yeah.
with very different backgrounds. With didn't even grow up here, right? Like I was born. I people ask me it's anyways. I'm confused. I'm a confused child, right? But when it comes to like more than half the population also, or people from our gatherings, when they try to go and make an impact, I think it's great that you want to go and make an impact and you want to like bring about a change and want to help those around you also, for whatever service that you choose to offer to the community. But it's also about recognizing कि यार आप किससे बात कर रहे हो, and
Mm-hmm.
वो खुद कहाँ से आ रहे हैं, you know.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and and I'd love for you to shed some light in that also, is that how can those around us who want to bring about a collective impact or want to like work towards a specific cause, you've taken that cause and made it your profession. Many people would still like to keep that passion alive and keep the profession separate as well. But how do you feel that people can bridge that gap? How do you think that they can make that collective effort that they want to make?
Yeah. I mean, it ranges from very basic, simple things um, to somewhat more sophisticated stuff. But in terms of simple things, what I've kind of learned really is that one thing that has really kind of that what fascinates me about the work that I do also is that you grow up thinking that there's certain people in your life who teach you. So a teacher teaches you, and your parents teach you, and your elders teach you. And I don't think I ever grew up thinking that a 4-year-old can teach me, or that a staff from domestic work, staff working in the domestic space can teach me, or a janitorial staff member can teach me. But you'd be surprised, right, at how much they know and how much they can enlighten you, because so often our definition of education or an educated person becomes conflated with the education of a literate person, and literacy really just comes down to how well you can read or write, perhaps even speak. But there's something known as functional literacy, which is how well do you live your life? How do you live your life? And the people that I've met, and I think this is something that I think everyone can kind of pick up on, is to open your mind to the ways in which people can teach you, and people who you normally conventionally don't regard as people who can teach you, right? So, like, I'll give you an example. So there's this little community in I don't want to say in Liari, but the outskirts of Liari, and they have this tradition. The Pashtun community, and they have a tradition called Landes. I have never read of this in any book. I've never seen this or heard of this anywhere. And the custom is that they speak to each other in poetry. So even if they have to say, like I said, go get that mug or that glass, there's going to be a whole verse on it. That's how they speak. That's how they live their life. And none of them know how to read or write or any of that. And for me to learn that was through experience and through interaction, because I could have taken that as something like just a thing, but it's a learning. It's something that the book doesn't teach you, and even like the conventional teacher doesn't. But if you open your mind to the ways in which people can teach you, I think the space has a lot to offer. And you actually do feel, then you start to value how much a conversation means. just pausing at a traffic light and talking to a child, for me, that is a kind of contribution in a weird way, because for me, that is doing the simple thing, that can mean a lot. Sometimes I've seen people have really interesting conversations with children selling things on the road, and it opens your mind up to a lot about their life, and you learn. And I think that's contribution to self and to other. And I think it deserves a lot more merit. It's simple, so it gets lost, but it deserves a lot more kind of recognition, I think. So yeah, that's one of the things I would say, actually, not to sound preachy or anything.
Not at all. This was great, man. Because I was just thinking about like that how it's a matter of like absorbing perspectives also. Like you have to allow yourself to like really see, like take it all in. Unless you
Yeah.
also don't expose yourself to that. Um, I think if you want to make an effort towards it, then if you want to make an effort towards working in the public education space also, you have to really be able to dive into that field, into the people around there. And it's not just the kids. Understanding their parents also, I feel like, plays such a big role, because that's what they see. And unfortunately, many of these kids also don't spend much time with their families, because either if they're in school or they're working. um,
Mhm.
so, and that's the reality of things. And getting that perspective, I think, is very important. I kind of wish, by the way, and I'm not saying that we didn't get the correct opportunity or the right opportunity, but I kind of wish that when we were doing community service in school, then we were told, or we were having this conversation around us. Because
Yeah.
I feel like when we were told to do community service, it was either great for the transcript, as you said earlier, or it's like, do good for those around you, but not really empathizing with the people you're doing work with, or helping empower or uplift in some way or the other.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's right. That's what it is, right? And that's what social, I mean, bringing back to social emotional learning, right? Because I feel like all of this is part of that. Like, to say that community service is important is not enough. And to say that community service is important for you to become a better human being is not enough, because what does it mean to be a better human being? Like, when have we ever unpacked it? And when have we ever unpacked it with the intention of accepting that it means different things to different people? That respect can mean something very different to different people. Kindness can mean different things. So can empathy, right? And these are universal values, and everyone has them. But the way we were taught, in fact, I don't even think we were taught these values in the sense of like direct instruction, right? There were things that were there, but they were never the focus of at least my schooling, really.
Hmm.
Like you said, community service is pitched as this, golden star that you can put on your report card. And that does put a lot of us in that savior complex that, we are in that position of superiority that we can go and, you know, save people really, but not really understanding that that there's something about coming on the same ground, leveling the playing field and working with people, not for.
Hmm.
So these are kind of minute things, the nuances that just words have power, man, and the way you name these things matters. It makes you, it actually informs the way you think.
Change the
Um,
narrative, yeah.
yeah, completely.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I'm seeing it right now. Like my sister and her friends, oh God, she's gonna kill me for saying this, but they want to go volunteer at a school and teach children their age. uh, you know so they're going to go in and teach people who are their age, and it's not going to be a back and forth. No one's going to ask those kids to teach them anything. It can be anything. It can be kanche, it can be, the basics of barter or trade. Because these kids, they if you tell some of these kids who, the school that they're going to, I'm talking about those specific kids, they have the kind of bargaining power to sell something that is, or to buy something at half price. They have those quick skills.
They're
No one's going to
hustlers,
ever,
yeah. and and,
yeah, no
and
one's going
the,
to ask those people, you come and teach them this. It's always going to be you guys from that school go and teach them something random, and that narrative, man, it's pretty problematic, actually.
that's actually
Sorry.
sparked some idea. I'm actually going to put this forward to some people, because I like that go to those schools. Yes, send people from big private schools, send the students, um, but Make it an exchange of kind.
Exactly. That's
Yeah,
empowerment.
yeah,
Empowerment
yeah,
is not you giving your service. It is you showing and actually acting. It's a two-way process.
yeah, yeah,
You know.
yeah. So Shazmina, as a very and feel free to take your time to answer this one, but what is it that motivates you or inspires you to keep at it, to keep doing what you're doing?
Man. Well, I think so much of it has to do with how much I learn about myself when I do this work, right? So things that I've realized, like, I realized that I'm not someone who can sit behind a desk. I've realized that I'm someone who needs to constantly be working, talking to people to work. So the things that it makes me realize about myself, and what fascinates me, how every day is new and surprising and full of challenges, and it's unreal sometimes, and it makes you feel crazy. But it's a real test of patience. I think it's a real test of patience. It's a real test of my own kind of ability to regulate emotions. I think it's something that helps me grow as a person. I think I'm always learning in the most unexpected of ways. So that fascinates me because I grew up as a bookworm. Everyone who knows me knows that I was quite the nerd, and for me to take a path that is quite the opposite of that is um is interesting personally. So yeah, in a short, concise answer, that would be it. And I love working with kids. I think I would always choose a kid over an adult any day, man. I think kids should. I think that there's something about the way we look at children as devoid of agency, as just receptive and passive receptors of services, right? And not as people who are actually powerful, not as individuals. I think so. I like doing that on a daily basis. It's pretty cool.
All right, so now that's actually quite sweet to hear. But and you say you like working with kids. Um, what is it that you feel that this actually gets me to ask that? What is it that you feel that you could actually? What is a message that you feel you could pass on to the kids about how they're looking at their own future, or about what trajectory they feel like they need to be on? How do you feel like you can change their mindset a little bit about that?
I think that what you just said, right? Like, what trajectory should they be on? I just don't know if we can predict these things. And I know maybe it sounds radical, but to think that there's one trajectory that a child needs to be on, um, that mentality can be, especially if it's institutionalized via school, So, for example, like I grew up with people who I think were analytically way sounder than I was, and who were able to manage their relationships and their emotions really well, make great decisions, but they never really were called the ideal student. It was ultimately the person who had the memory, who could regurgitate information, on repeat, like a tape recorder, and then have that marking scheme assess how well they repeat. That was the good student. And in doing so, you put down so many people who have potential to do so much. And I think that mindset is something, but again, till it's institutionalized the way it is, it'll be hard. But if I could, and I say this to the kids I work with all the time, that these things are important, but you are more than this. Your experience as a student is an experience of a learner. And this is one way that you are showing what you're learning, but there's so much more. So I've asked them, for example, to assess how these days what we're doing is pretty cool. We kind of like give ourselves a report card of each other, which is not grades, but of how we did. So like sometimes the report card is like, today I kind of said this word this many times. We pick on a word. Or today I didn't say this one word. So for example, if we're trying not to abuse, so like आज मैंने ये नहीं बोला, or anything like that. Like, a report card, an unconventional report card of how we feel about ourselves today, or how we feel about our emotions or our actions or anything like that. So, breaking that stereotype that a report card is just supposed to show A, B's, and C's.
So you're basically making like it's like a self check that I'm
Yeah,
checking in on myself, and like this is what I'm doing, and I'm on the like I'm improving. The things that are going to make me a better human or more well rounded, kind of like that.
yeah. Yeah, stuff like that, and stuff like, there's so many of these kids who just love singing, who love art, and they know they can't make money from it, because that's also true. I mean, people have to struggle when it comes to the creative space, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't do it with something else, right? So being a little practical about it also, that yeah, you need to get a job because your family depends on you, but that doesn't strip you of your right to pursue what you love, you know and that doesn't strip you of your right to express what you love and to accept it, because we bury it. I mean, I buried it. Like, I've loved singing growing up, never pursued it, never took it seriously. We were going to start a band, man.
We were,
So,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
these are things that we were so things like this, I think, are important to talk about, um but also kind of bearing in mind the realities of their lives, you know and what is important to them. So yeah, that would be something to talk about.
Interesting. And what about their own their well-being, in terms of, I don't mean this is all working towards their well-being, of course, but I mean that working towards their own physical well-being as well, that um, these kids are also exposed to a lot around them. uh, some might be, around those who are substance abuse victims, or um, you know just all sorts of stuff, right? Like how are you guys working around that as well, making sure that they actually are protected holistically?
I think the first thing is that you have to accept that you can't protect all children. It's a very painful acceptance, but you can't, because they're with you very few hours of the day,
Mm,
not even few hours of the day anymore. So you really don't have control of any sort of what happens later in their life
mm,
or in their day. What happens though is, like, for a lot of people, substance abuse, these kind of things aren't problems. These are just normal things. I mean, they're problems for people who are on the outside. If I see a child not wearing his slippers, it's going to be such a big problem for me. Like, it's not a problem for them. It's not a problem for his parents. It's not a problem for the community, because you see, this is a way that they've been living, right? So one thing is to accept, to kind of revisit, what is my assumption about protection? What do I mean when I say protection? Is it the same kind of protection that I got? Because that was something very different. And that was perhaps also an unnecessary sheltering from reality as well, right? With these kids, I think it's important to kind of think about, like, what do they think about protection, right? Because for them, protection could just be something as simple as getting food in time. That's protection, right? So things like that, and then really also kind of understand that whose responsibility is this. On one level it's the parents, but on the other level it is the government's responsibility. And so as a private organization or as an independent, there's only so much you can do. So you have to accept what your capacity is. You also have to accept that it's important to work, if you are really truly into this and you want to work on issues of protection or with children, there has to be some liaison with the government, right?
mm,
With the people who are actually fully responsible for doing this.
mm.
So, I mean, to that end, we have nothing, zilch. But it's important to keep talking about it in the hopes that it will happen someday.
All right, all right. And I seriously hope that all the efforts that do take place, like, bring about that change that they're all working towards, even if they are in silos, even if they're working together with the government, however it is. Um, Fingers crossed, I guess. Optimistic
Yeah,
as always. Got to keep that alive.
yeah.
Uh,
There's no other option, right?
yeah, and I think that's very interesting, that how, like, growing up, I remember when I moved to Pakistan, I was, at that time it wasn't as bad also, like as you see now. And I'm talking about, like, maybe not the education space because I was 10 at that time, but things like pollution, the weather, politics,
Hmm.
security, things like that. Economics, it wasn't that bad. And even then, people used to say कि जब तुम्हारे बच्चे हो जाएंगे फिर पाकिस्तान बदलेगा. And I'm like, okay, शायद जब मेरे बच्चे होंगे तब पाकिस्तान बदलेगा, but at least I'll get to see it.
Yeah,
I honestly see, I see it like that. It's like, if I don't try working towards it, if you don't try working towards it, or if other people in our and our networks don't work towards it, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
says it's gonna be easy. No one says it's gonna take like 2 years, 5 years. It's gonna take 20. It's gonna take a generation to change.
Yeah, maybe even more, honestly, because
Yeah.
like when you think about it, that the generation before ours don't even know what these names are. All generations have names apparently.
So
We're
apparently we're Gen Z, by the way. Did you know that?
we're millennials, is what my sister told me last.
But
That's
apparently not. So like I'm again, this is another like point of confusion for me now is like थोड़ा सा वो crisis में आ गया हूँ मैं कि are we millennials or Gen Zs? But the point is that whether it was the millennials or the boomers, you were saying.
yeah.
Sorry, I digress. I digress.
But there was something that they were doing in their time that they really believed will make the impact, right? And of course, I mean, it would be denial to say that we as a generation are more active than those before us, because there was definitely more momentum in youth spaces back in the day than there is now. And so it didn't happen. And then you wonder why, you wonder what was it. Then when people had that motivation and they had all of that belief and the ideology, why didn't it work? And so, one wonders how long it will take, but hope is the only option sometimes, right? Like we don't have an option. So yeah, back to what you said.
Yeah. So Shazmina has one last question for you, so that we can wrap this up. Is that if you could go back in time and you could meet your childhood self, what would you tell her?
I would say start a band with us.
Ah, yeah, I like that.
I think I would I would probably be I would I would definitely actually not probably give more importance to my language. I would not be afraid of going to Urdu class. I would try not to hate it. But also, I recognize a lot of that was not on me. A lot of that had to do with the way I was taught and the way Urdu and my culture was pitched to me. So, but I would definitely try to take more effort and hope that I can have a conversation like this in Urdu, which still does not happen. So stuff about that, that would probably be one of the main things. I would actually also try and watch more documentaries because I think I grew up not watching any. Like I would not watch the National Geographic or any history channel my mom used to put on and saying, yeah, no. And I think all kids do that, but it's also because of the way these subjects were taught to us as dreadful and boring and dry.
Yeah.
So
We didn't have Netflix then also, to be fair. Like I think that like if you've seen Explained or if you've seen One Strange Rock, it's great. Like One Strange Rock is about the universe and the world, and
yeah,
Will Smith is
yeah,
is doing the commentary
yeah.
behind it. Now imagine if Will
But I
Smith
saw
was
that
teaching us about history.
I saw that like few years ago, you know, like
Yeah.
these things. So yeah, I mean, I wish I did more of that. I wish I was my own parent for a bit.
Your own
Watch
fan favorite, yeah. Yeah. Interesting,
but yeah,
cool. But Shazmina, thank you so much for coming, man. This was great. This was, I think, the whole time I was just like, I felt a little nostalgic. I'm not gonna lie. It's like going back to the days at Lyceum.
yeah,
After every psych class, we'd like grab some chai, grab some coffee, Bashir Baiki, and just chill out and like endless conversations about everything. It's
yeah.
great, man.
It's
And
like a
look at where we
flash.
are now.
Yeah, it's literally like the snap of a finger, and it just I don't know happened and it ended. But
Yeah. And so many
yeah,
ups and downs along the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. But Shazmina, once again, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Shazmina Durrani. Sorry, I think you were going to say something.
No, I was gonna thank you for having me, and I hope you keep doing this because I think it's awesome.
Fingers crossed, man. Jab tak hai
Yeah.
jaan. Jab tak
Oh,
hai
I
jaan.
knew you would say that. I knew it was coming. How can it happen without a Shah Rukh Khan dialogue?
Let me say it like him, na. Jab tak hai jaan. No, I can't do it right now. It's not the right time. But everybody, that was Shazminay Durrani. Shazminay is doing a lot of work in the space of public education in Pakistan and child well-being. Shazminay, would you mind if people got in touch with you? If they would like to collaborate or seek some more opportunities in this space? Yeah,
Pretty much
great.
open to it, yeah.
Awesome. So Shazminay's details will be down in the description. If you are listening to this and you've made it this far, thank you very much. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next one coming out next Wednesday, only on Behind the Grind with Asad Hashim Ali. Bye-bye.